Hi everyone! Today I'll be sharing discoveries from the 30-day map challenge, or as I like to call it, I'll be giving you the gist of what I learned. And my name is Kate Berg, and when I'm not at my day job as GIS lead at the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, I'm sharing mappy memes on Twitter at my handle Pocato_. And I mentioned Twitter because it's pretty substantial to the 30-day map challenge. That's where most people are posting their images with the hashtag 30-day map challenge. But the challenge couldn't be possible without the greater geospatial community on Twitter interacting and engaging. And if you aren't already on Twitter and engaging with what we call hashtag GIS chat, you're missing out on a great opportunity to connect with people all over the world that are just as passionate and just as nerdy about maps as you. Maybe it's weird, but I do feel like best friends with some people that I've never met just because I've had some really fun and special spatial conversations on there. We even have a GIS chat logo that you see right there on the screen. So to be perfectly honest from the beginning, I did not complete all 30 maps. I completed about 21 out of the 30, but I had a total blast doing it, and I firmly believe that I'm better off after having this experience because of what I learned. And so I'm here to share some of those lessons that I learned not only from the ArcGIS community throughout the event, but also my own personal workflows and the lessons that I learned on how to be successful, including to work smarter, not harder, be mindful of several things, and have fun while appreciating the community. What's really cool to me is that some of these lessons occurred even before the challenge started. So I had heard about the 30-day map challenge the year before, and I was always envious of the people that were able to participate in it because it seemed like a really cool opportunity, but it didn't seem possible. Completing 30 maps in 30 days, that was nuts to me. So here I am lamenting on Twitter the week before the 2020 map challenge was starting because I was too busy to participate and I didn't want to miss out. So what I learned from this was that it's a very mutual feeling held by our GIS community. So here's Michelle and David sympathizing by saying it takes more than one day to make a map, let alone choosing something as intentional as a font. And here's Jeff and the infamous Ken Fields sharing that they like living vicariously through others' maptastic work. And it did feel good to grumble with the GIS community a little. But the cool thing was I also got some really cool advice with this post. So for example, Barbara here suggested creating multiple maps from a more narrowed topic or data source. So the gist of that is that she took one particular data source, in this case a dog walking route, and made 4 maps. She knocked out 4 maps with this one particular layer, which is pretty cool. Another tip I got from this thread was making maps ahead of time and not actually doing one a day, maybe adding more on weekends. So the idea would be planning ahead, working ahead, and not spending all the time on one day working on one map to reduce some of the pressure. Speaking of planning ahead, our own Practical Carto Day's other 30-day map challenge speaker, Chris, shared this tip with me, and I took his advice. So he had this spreadsheet and he laid out all the topics ahead of time so he knew exactly what he was going to be making every day. And here's my filled out brainstorm sheet. So with all these tips, with all the support from the community, I felt at least a little bit less intimidated to participate in the challenge. And so with that, I had to start getting inspired by things. And so the first thing that I looked towards was some past experiences. So I thought, why not make some maps of things that are special to me? So whether that's my educational background or travel adventures, professional interests, here are some of my maps that were inspired by previous opportunities of mine. So I have wildlife crossings in the state of Michigan from my experiences at the National Wildlife Federation. University of Michigan owned buildings from my master's experience. And below here we have all the counties that my husband and I have traveled through together. I also found inspiration in some pretty cool data. So for example, here are locations of where Bigfoot has yet to make an appearance. So it's all the counties where Bigfoot sightings hadn't occurred in. And I'm always on the lookout for fun data. And in fact, every time I stumble across a piece of interesting data, I save it in this highly organized email thread that you see here. Another place that I looked was some of my favorite things. So for those of you who are familiar with me on Twitter, it'll come to no surprise that one of my favorite things is potatoes. But I'm also an avid scuba diver, and my favorite animal is the tapir. So from there, these three maps were pretty easy. We have all the shipwrecks in the Great Lakes, and I'm fortunate enough to have dove some of them. We have ranges of the animal tapir across the world. And at the bottom here, we have how potatoes originated and how they traveled across the world over time. So now that I've shared some of this inspiration that I had for my map subjects, let's talk about actually creating those maps. And the gist of what I learned from this challenge is you don't have to reinvent the wheel every map. You can stand on the shoulders of giants. There's lots of stuff that's already out there. There's styles and color schemes and data for you to take and make your own. So going back to this path of the potato map, I drew heavily on a map that was already created on the Making History Relevant blog. And I also used the brilliant polygons provided by Project Linework to create some really interesting landforms. And if you haven't already checked out Project Linework, I highly recommend doing it. There's some really cool data for you to download there. Going back to the shipwreck map, I relied heavily on a hack developed by Esri cartographer John Nelson called the Tattered Map Sandwich. So he actually scanned a wrinkly piece of paper to get this texture, and then you sandwich your map in between the textures to make this kind of cool old antique map effect. Another cool example of this is something that recently happened on Twitter. So I discovered this really cool website called PokePalettes that has a color scheme for each of the fictitious Pokemon animals. And then Dror created over 150 different QGIS styles with each of those Pokemon palettes. And he made those all available for free to download on the QGIS Styles plugin site. And just like that, you can also download lots of styles if your preference is ArcGIS Pro on Esri's website. So regardless of your preference, there's lots of really cool effects that you can download. Another thing that you can download is some map wizardry, again by John Nelson here. His blog is linked at the bottom. And he has a lot of data and a lot of hacks that he posts there that you can download for free right from the site. So I know I'm going to get a couple open source folks here who will be like, boo, Esri. But his tips and tricks, while they are ArcGIS Pro based, have many applications that you can use in open source stuff. So take, for example, this map that I made for the Use a New Tool Challenge. So I made this in QGIS, totally in QGIS, and the subject is Market Island. It's a small 8-acre island with a lighthouse on it. And the island itself is shared between both Sweden on one side and Finland on the other, and it's a very unique boundary. So I knew right away that I needed to find a really easy way to get that data. And I used this handy trick that I had picked up from John's Esri blog. So he shares this awesome secret for exporting data from OpenStreetMap in his 12 busiest airports blog. So the first step is to go to overpassturbo.eu. You zoom to where you want to on the map. So here you see I zoomed to Market Island, and then you click Wizard and type in your item of interest. So I was interested in the boundaries of that island, and then voila, you can export the data. So those are just some examples of working smarter, not harder. There's a lot of places online that you can explore for not just data, but styles and inspiration. You just need to know where to look. Another thing that I learned from this challenge is to be mindful. It's really easy to get wrapped up in the intensity of the 30-day map challenge, and you forget some really important things to be successful. So what do all these maps have in common? They have huge data sets. These were some of my least favorite maps to make because they were so hard to deal with. It just froze over and over again. So the first thing I want you to be mindful of is the size of the data you're using. You don't want to spend an inordinate amount of time just waiting for things to load, especially when you need to make a map quickly. Another thing that you should be mindful of is what you're actually creating and the implications of that subject. So this is my boundaries map for the 30-day map challenge. And the outlines that you see here are just buffers of varying distances, depending on what they're supposed to be encompassing. So whether it's United Kingdom, Great Britain, all these different terms. So this is based off of a graphic I got from Medium. So I took that Venn diagram, I made this map, and after posting it on Twitter, I was just bombarded by comments. So with those comments, I learned a lot about the geopolitics of the region. Many followers were against me calling it the British Isles. I had neglected to include the Shetland Islands. Oops. And so I tried to remedy my mistake, including a little Shetland up there in the corner. But mainly what I learned is that I don't want to touch the naming conventions in this area with a 10-foot pole anytime soon. And just to be really mindful of the subject I'm producing. Now, as cartographers, we've probably all gotten the memo of making our maps colorblind friendly. But another way that we can improve the accessibility of our content is by providing alternative text to the images that we post. So alt text is basically just a written description of your image, and it's used by screen readers. And without alt text, the screen reader might just read the name of the image that's there, which is pretty unhelpful and doesn't look that great for a map that you've spent 5 minutes to 5 hours on. So instead, describe the image as you would to a blind person. And any text that's in the image should also be included in that alt text. And now I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I definitely didn't do this as much as I should have during the last challenge, but it's something that I'm going to really strive for the 2021 challenge. It's one of my main goals to improve on. So again, there's lots of things that I learned to be mindful during this process, and I encourage you to do so as well. I want to return one more time to my first image and show you one more piece of advice that I received from our geo community. So this is from the legend himself, the 30-day map challenge founder. And he mentions just to have fun. Just the point of the challenge is to appreciate the community and see what others are doing. And a lot of the time I didn't feel like I was creating anything good enough. But again, that's not the point of the challenge. And creating a map quickly does not use the same skills as creating a map over days or weeks does. You're using different skills, you're pushing yourself to be creative and technical in a whole new way, and that's really, really cool. And you'll never know who you might connect with or inspire with what you create. So I found the geospatial community is fun and welcoming, and I've really enjoyed connecting with fellow map makers across the world, and it's even more engaging and exciting during this 30-day map challenge. I hope you consider participating in this fun event, because I'd love to see what you create. And hey, between the other map rock stars at this conference and this talk, I think you already have the gist of everything you need to know. Thank you, and happy mapping.